questioning is perhaps the greatest gift we have as human beings.
Science is more than a body of knowledge. It's a way of thinking.
It's a way of thinking that teaches us to question everything we think we know.
Science came about by developing techniques, methodologies for gaining reliable knowledge about the world.
We have at our fingertips the technologies that were only possible for the largest governments and corporations 20 years ago as an individual today.
If the human civilization continued at anything remotely like the current pace of technology advancement for a million years, where would we be? I think we're either extinct or on a lot of planets.
The good thing about science is that it's true whether or not you believe in it.
We hold the scientific method in high regard because it works. If it stopped working, we'd throw it out.
Discover the past.
Create the future.
This is the Here and How podcast.
Welcome to the Here and How podcast, where every week we dive deep into big ideas, exploring the past so that we can create a brighter future together. I am Thomas Westbrook, and I am joined by two magnificent co-hosts, Rachel Oates and Stephen Woodford. Say hi, guys.
Hello.
Hi, guys.
This is going to be a very special episode, a Halloween special episode, our first ever Halloween special episode. Cue spooky music. So for those of you who are familiar a little bit with demonology, most people are maybe a little bit acquainted with the notion of demons and demon possession within the Christian tradition. There's stories of like Jesus driving out demons into a flock of pigs that went and drowned themselves. There's stories of Jesus casting out demons. There's not a whole lot of mention of demons in the Old Testament, but you may be surprised to learn that the concept of demon possession is actually a lot more ubiquitous across religions. It's not just in Christianity, but the beliefs behind demons, what they are, what's going on, varies from region and culture to culture, and what they say that the demons allow them to do or cause them to do varies as well. So I have asked Steve to kind of research a little bit into the differences of the notion of demon possession in different religions and different cultures. And so, Steve, maybe if you want to share what you found with us a little bit, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, sure. So, where to begin? I guess what I found is that there's always been concepts of demons, even though they may not be called demons, in pretty much every culture, in one form or another, and it's got a relationship to religion in general, because religion is our first attempt of knowledge in most areas, if that makes sense, or it's our first assertions. So the oldest references that I could find was demonic possession from the Sumerians, and they believed that all diseases of the body and mind were caused by what they called sickness demons, which they called, I believe, Giddim. That's what I believe it's called anyway. Their remedy was to apply bandages and salves, so oils, etc. It's very, very.
So you cast out demons with bandages.
Essentially, yeah, it seems that nuts. But it makes sense, like if you can, and it's hard to do this. It's a lot harder than people seem to realize, at least. If you can hypothesize a situation where you don't know the knowledge that you know, so you don't know how disease works, you don't know about germ theory, you don't know much at all, and you find yourself, in the state of nature where things really are shit. It's short, brutish, and just nasty. When someone that you know is suffering, and there's no reason for them to be suffering, you didn't see your neighbour stick a spear in him, there is no wound from him being knocked off his horse or whatever it might be. It's very easy to think there must be some kind of supernatural presence here, some supernatural work. And that's essentially where demons and their various forms have their roots. It's the attribute of agency to things we don't understand that are bad.
That actually reminds me of, I don't know if you guys have seen Outlander, but in the first, it's about this woman who's a World War II nurse, and she gets transported back in time to like 1700 Scotland. And it's really good. It might sound dodgy, but it's really, really good. And there's this one bit in the first season where all the people in like the nearby village are like, oh, so-and-so's son has got possessed by demons and this, and he went up to this place and it's like haunted by ghosts and now he's possessed. And so she goes like up to the place and she finds there's like a plant that's like poisoned him and it's causing hallucinations, and she like mixes up a cure and then goes and like saves him and stuff. But everyone else is like, what are you doing, woman? He's possessed. We need the priest, not like medicine. And but yeah, and then and then she saves him and eventually is accused of witchcraft. So fun times.
Ah, crazy.
Yeah. But it's a really good program. It reminded me of that.
Yeah, we'll have to check it out. Links in the description. So other areas that I found actually worth mentioning just now is there's many cuneiform clay tablets which contain prayers of certain gods, to certain gods I should say, where people were asking for protection against demons. So and these are like, you know, they're spending much of their resources into making very definitive statements about demons, just in the same way that they did so with morality. You know, there's lots of don't steal, and they are on tablets as well, not just Christianity, despite what Western intellectuals may want you to think. But it is pretty interesting to look this up, because even shamanic cultures believed in demon possessions. Then what you've got is the more traditional view that we're all used to, which is from Christianity, and there's actually a wide differentiation between the different denominations and how they see the demons. Most of them see them as something to do with Satan or fallen angels, but there is quite a lot of difference. Some denominations reject the idea of possession and demons in that light entirely, whereas some of them, they're still a very, very much a thing to be wary of. I didn't have the time to go into all of the differentiations between them, but it is mainly Catholicism that puts emphasis on it, it seems.
I have a potentially stupid question. So, hypothetically, demons are real, and they do possess people. But, like, why? What's their goal? What do people think these demons are getting out of it?
I think it depends on the religious framework or the framework of your beliefs. So, in Christianity, it's to push you away from being with God and Jesus. Whereas with Islam, I think they refer to them as jinn. It's similarly to try and make it so that you're away from Allah. That's what they're trying to do. And the reason why Allah or Yahweh would allow this is because of respect of free will, which again is something that I don't think exists, but is a crucial component to most religions, because then you're not actually fully comparable for your actions.
Well, it's funny though, because to a large extent, while if you talk to the average Muslim, they may say that, you know, oh yeah, you have choice. Of course you have choice. At the same time, like, they don't necessarily believe in free will. Like they'll say like that, oh, this was just destined, it's fate, it's already written. And so it's like, you can have your cake or you can eat it. You can't do both.
Yeah.
Like either you have free will or you have fate. Like you don't, you know, you can't have them at the same time. You know, they'll be like, oh, but maybe there's like some big overarching goal that is moving towards, and the different paths there are different. It's like, okay, whatever. But yeah, this notion of demons or jinn, and you know, the Islamic tradition oftentimes is to try to basically wreak havoc against God's kingdom. To it's making a mockery of God. It's demons who hate God, who are lashing out, and they're trying to, you know, you've opened your soul up by either, you know, in Christian traditions it might be, oh, you used a Ouija board and you just welcomed in the devil and now he has control over your soul, but before, like, he didn't. And it's always something silly. Dungeons and Dragons, Pokemon, you know, heavy metal music,
Harry Potter,
which kind of takes us back to in the 1980s. There was a resurgence in fear over the demonic and the supernatural called the satanic panic. Have either of you guys heard of that before?
I have heard of that term, yeah.
Was it an American thing, or was it kind of more worldwide or Western, or?
It was mostly an American thing.
Okay.
And it basically, there was a book that was published called Michelle Remembers. And it was this girl who, she went into a psychologist, and they went through this process of trying to basically come up with suppressed memories. And but what they realized later, what doctors realize, is that this actually doesn't work, that you can implant false memories in kids and make them think that things happened that didn't. But she had all these wild memories of like these satanic rituals and sacrifices that she saw, and like sex abuse and stuff, and like all these crazy things. And this book became a bestseller, to the point where then you started hearing all these other accusations popping up all over the place, including at the McMartin preschool, which kids were coming forward and saying that there were like underground tunnels underneath the school, and that kids were being abducted and taken down there to, be abused, and that there was all these, blood rituals and stuff and demon worship by the teachers. And so there were these trials that went on for quite some time, and they gained a massive amount of media attention before finally being completely debunked. And, it's like, you'd think if there were tunnels under the school, that would be pretty easy to find, but it took them however long to disprove is crazy. But there was no substance to it, and eventually, with enough media attention debunking this stuff, then it was shown to be completely spurious. But there was a lot of harm. Like, there were people who, they're on trial. They had these accusations, these false accusations against them. Their lives were ruined, or at least in limbo for the time being. They're in jail. They're on trial. They're seen as these horrible, satanic child abusers, when it's completely fabricated memories. Like, it wasn't reality.
That's insane.
There's a lot of harm that can happen there. There was another known fraud called Martha Brossier, who apparently she claimed that she was being like possessed by demons and stuff, but she sounded more like a psychic, like how these mediums will have, they'll conjure the spirits of the dead and like speak using them. But there was a Catholic exorcist who was kind of like an ancient James Randi in a way. Like he was skeptical of her claims, and he went to debunk it, and he took like some holy water and he handed it to her and told her it was regular water, and she drank it and didn't have any kind of reaction. So like he's like, which nowadays we would say, well, of course she wouldn't, because it's all fake. Like, there is no such thing as demon possession. It's just people react in a violent way when they think that they're supposed to, or when they think that there's something wrong.
It seems to be like specifically with like hysteria, mania, psychosis, Tourette's, epilepsy, schizophrenia, like all of these kind of things. That tends to be where it's very much must be a demon.
Oh yeah. And we were actually, I asked Rachel to kind of look a little bit into the science of some of this stuff. And I'm not sure if, I think I asked you to look into epilepsy. And I'm not sure if you were able to look into any of the other causes and stuff, but I've kind of looked up some as well. So Rachel, do you want to kind of share what you've learned from that?
Yeah, sure. So with things like epilepsy, basically it's all about an excess of like electrical signals in the brain. So that like neurons work and communicate with each other because you get a buildup of electrical energy, which you get like a buildup of chemicals, and then that creates an action potential, and when it reaches like a threshold of that, then it sends signals to other neurons. I'm explaining it terribly, but basically when you have this kind of like surge of electrical energy either in one part of the brain or in multiple parts of the brain, it causes sort of neurons and neural pathways to fire at times when you don't expect it to, which can result in things like tremors and jitters. It can make you like lash out with body parts. It can make you shake and tremble. It can make you see things that aren't there. And obviously the cause, you can't see it with your eyes, with your senses, anything, because it's in the brain. The only way we can really tell it's happening now is by doing like brain scans and monitoring, the signals in the brain and stuff. But at the time, people had no idea what it was. It would just happen out of nowhere. So it's kind of easy to see why people would attribute it to spirits and demons and stuff.
Well, especially if someone is like all out convulsing on the floor and foaming at the mouth.
Yeah.
And if you read the accounts, like if you go into, the New Testament and the Bible, and you read the accounts of what they're calling demon possession, it is literally a word for word description of seizures, of someone who's convulsing, and it'll say, and the demon seized him and he fell on the floor and he was, shaking and writhing and foaming at the mouth. It's like, dude, it's literally a seizure.
Yeah.
It's we know what causes this. We know what it is.
Have you guys seen a seizure?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I've not seen like seizures as we think of them now with like shaking and stuff. But I had a friend in sixth form who had like a form of epilepsy which would just make her space out completely. So she'd be awake, but her brain wouldn't be conscious. So she'd just not be aware of anything going on around her. And she just continued doing whatever action she was doing at the time. So if she was drawing or something, her hand would continue to go backwards and forwards, but she had no control over what she was doing. She wasn't aware of anything. It got really dangerous sometimes because it happened when she was walking and she'd just walk out into the road. which was really, really bad. And she had to have like people with her all the time, like friends and stuff, in case it happened. And
No, it's bad stuff.
It's scary.
My mother has epilepsy, and she is an alcoholic. Once you're an alcoholic, you always are, right?
Yeah.
But she used to, when she was drinking at her worst, she'd have epileptic fits all the time, and especially when she was trying to come off the alcohol. I remember once seeing her have an epileptic fit. In fact, more than once, but I remember this one particularly. And after being on the floor, being in, essentially, you could really do some damage because you're convulsing. When she came back, she didn't know who she was. She didn't know who I was. Didn't know where she was. It was just, it was a reboot of the brain, and so it took a good 15 minutes before she even knew who I was. Just looked frightened in the corner. It's amazing what an effect epilepsy can do, and if you view that without the knowledge that we have, without people being informed, it must be terrifying. Absolutely terrifying, and a demon would fit that kind of that kind of scenario, because well, what else happened? Like this is supernatural forces here. Our high priest XYZ has just suffered. Why would he suffer? Well, because the demons want him to suffer. Or why would this innocent kid suffer? The innocent kid hasn't done anything wrong. Well, and there must be evil at play. Not nature just is evil, and there's problems with gene mutations and. Hey, presto.
Well, and if you don't understand, if you're living in a time period in which, they didn't even know what the brain did. Like when Egyptians would mummify a body, they would literally scoop out the brain because it's like, we don't need that. Like they thought that your heart was like the source of your thought and the source of your, your feelings and everything. When actually now we have a pretty good understanding. We don't necessarily know exactly what, we haven't solved the hard problem of consciousness, but we know that different regions of the brain, are connected to different functions and to different abilities, and if you damage those sections, you lose those abilities. So if, let's say that someone has a stroke and they start to they have a hard time reading things, they have a hard time saying words, their face starts to droop, they feel numbness, like if you don't have the slightest clue what's going on, that could be an extremely terrifying thing. You could think that like, an evil spirit is taking over my body and it's, getting in the way of my senses and stuff. It's really easy for people to substitute ignorance with something just in order to not, fear the unknown. Yeah. And so they replace it with something that is terrifying and potentially extremely damaging.
Yeah, we were talking about in last week's episode as well how people start to think that drinking alcohol made you like possessed by demons and stuff.
Yeah,
it's kind of easy to see how that happened as well, because they were, they saw all these signs that they thought were demon possession, like slurring words and shaking and stuff like that. And then they saw, alcohol makes this happen. Alcohol must bring in the demons or something.
Is that why they call them spirits?
Maybe.
Quite possibly.
Yeah.
That would make a lot of sense.
A couple of other different medical aspects that lead people to behave in ways that have been previously associated with demon possession. And Rachel, stop me if any of these are areas that you're familiar with. But sometimes people have a form of like hysteria, mania, psychosis. Tourette's is a fun one, but Tourette's basically, it causes you to have like outbursts or like little tics where you might be talking normally and then all of a sudden you just burst out in like profanity, or you just say something out of the blue, and it's not a demon, it's a physical phenomenon. Epilepsy, we talked about. Schizophrenia is when if you think that you like if you hear voices, or you feel like you have other people in the room, like you see or hear things. Oftentimes it's associated with like auditory hallucinations. I actually had a fan reach out to me and ask me, she has suffered from schizophrenia for years, and for her, it's a terrifying thing because her family is convinced that it is demons, and she's like, "Please help me, help me show them, help me prove to them that I'm not demon possessed." And
that breaks my heart.
That's sad. Yeah.
It sucks because like this is something that like people suffer with. If you've seen the movie Beautiful Mind, it's about an absolutely brilliant mathematician and professor, and I believe he even won a Nobel Prize, but he suffered with schizophrenia. Mm-hmm. And it's not something that is supernatural. It's not something that's spiritual. It's that we have certain regions of our brain that are responsible for us having, for us hearing noises and for us, speaking and stuff. And you can have different miswiring. You can have, stuff that goes on that causes you to experience things that aren't there. Hallucinations are extremely common. And most people have hallucinations at least once in their life. And it can be caused by everything from, drug-induced hallucinations. You can have, take psilocybin, mushrooms, things like that. You can have hallucinations just from sleep deprivation. So if you stay up for several days in a row in college, I had points where I would pull multiple all-nighters just studying for tests, and I would get to the point where I'm like starting to kind of like doze off, like while I'm standing up even, and I would start to kind of like see things that weren't there and then I'd be like, whoa, like I seriously need to get some sleep. There's a book called, I think it's called SEAL Team 6, and it talks about how during their training period, they have what's called Hell Week, where they go almost a week without sleep, and they're just pushing them constantly. He's like, towards the end of the week, there was a day when like me and my crew were like, we're in this boat, and we're going through this challenge where we're having to swim through like really rough water and trying to accomplish this task, and all of a sudden one of my buddies looks over and he's like, sea monster, and we all look, and there's this sea monster like in the water, and we all start hitting at it with our oars and just like beating the crap out of it, and then we realized like at the same time, like it's just a net. But they all had this collective hallucination because they were all going through sleep paralysis, or not sleep paralysis, through sleep deprivation.
Damn.
I'd be really interested to know like what they each saw when they were sort of not imagining, but like hallucinating the sea monster. Yeah. Like get a sketch artist to sketch each of like what they thought they saw and see how similar it was.
Fascinating. Yeah,
that would be interesting.
But it shows that you can have collective delusions. Like you can have stuff that you all kind of, if you have a little bit of suggestion from someone, and if you have, that's what it is. If you're suggestible, you can. Yeah.
When I was young, I suffered with hallucinations all the time. So my upbringing was a bit hectic, and as a young kid, it just stressed me out, and I saw things that weren't there. For example, I went downstairs once and I saw my dad's head decapitated, laying on the floor. And it was horrible. It's like, I might be smiling now, but as a kid, it was terrifying. As I walked around it, the head would turn and follow me. Now, this is a kid. It's incredibly, and it's very real. It feels very, very real. So I have a lot of sympathy for people which experience anything like this. It's absolutely terrifying. But
did you ever sleepwalk, or were you
no?
Were there causes, drugs or alcohol or anything?
No. It was apparently stress based. I got diagnosed with migraines, which I think is a ridiculous thing to say that is a part of a migraine. But another thing is, just to go to your suggestibility thing, I watched Lord of the Rings, where you have those like apparitions that have a cloak on them. The Death Eaters or whatever they're called. Yeah. It might be a Harry Potter thing, both of which have a similar thing. I remember looking in the corner of my room, and as I was looking long enough, feeling frightened, one of those got up from the ground and started coming towards me. And I could hear it, I could feel it. It was absolutely terrifying. But the thing is that to me it was very real. And this is the power that the brain has when things aren't functioning as perhaps they should be. So for people that have, full-blown schizophrenia and they really do hear voices and see things, it must be very, very difficult. And all I can say is that if you do have it, you have my utmost sympathy.
Well, and when I was little, I remember just looking up in the room and, you see shadows, and shadows, like our brain is really good at seeing patterns where there are none.
Yeah.
Pareidolia we've talked about before.
Absolutely.
And that's where like the face on Mars, like it looks like a face at a low resolution, and then they get like higher and higher resolution pictures. It's like, oh, that wasn't a face. It was just like a rock formation. And, looks nothing like it. But when you're a kid and you're sitting in a dark room and you're afraid and you think that there's like spirits and ghosts and you're told that all this stuff is real, then all of a sudden you start to see it everywhere. And it's because of suggestibility and our brain's ability to see patterns and to recognize patterns. But I want to talk about too, you mentioned having, seeing hallucinations at night, and I talked about, sleep deprivation. But if you go without sleep, you actually increase your chance of getting sleep paralysis. Also, if you have alcohol or if you sleep on your back or things like that, like there's different things that can cause this. But have either of you heard of sleep paralysis before, or have you experienced it before?
I've not experienced it, but sorry, go on, Steve.
No, you go ahead. You're saying.
I was going to say, like, from what I've heard, basically, your brain kind of wakes up, but the rest of you doesn't, if that makes sense. So you kind of wake up, but you can't move, you can't react or anything, and then you start to have hallucinations, and you might see people sort of hovering over your bed or standing over you or something, and there's nothing you can do.
Feel like you're sinking.
It's
yeah.
Basically, what happens with sleep paralysis is during the body, when you go to sleep, it goes through several different phases of sleep. And, you'll be in deeper and lighter sleep and stuff. And one of the deepest phases are REM sleep. In that phase, your brain releases two chemicals, GABA and glycine, that help to paralyze your muscles. And there's actually an advantage to this. It's so that if you're sleeping in bed, you're not going to roll over and thrash and fall out of bed and hurt yourself. Like it's for your own safety.
Yeah,
but
or
usually,
lay on your baby. It's just, it helps.
Yeah. Usually when you wake up, then, your brain, like everything goes back to like a kind of chemical equilibrium or normal state, and you are able to get up and walk around and there's no problems. But every once in a while, if you're woken at the wrong point or something, you can wake up and your brain is alert, but your muscles are still in a paralyzed state. And so your muscles are paralyzed, your brain starts releasing adrenaline, your amygdala starts going crazy, you start feeling like fear. And at the same time, your brain, because it's sending signals to your muscles, and there's a desynchrony with your sense of self, like your sense of proprioception of like the location of where your muscles are versus where your brain is telling them to go. You can feel a sensation of floating or like rising off the bed.
Yeah.
And you can also experience hypnopompic or hypnagogic hallucinations, where you'll see things that aren't there. It's like you're entering or exiting sleep, and you're disoriented. You've got all these chemicals firing in your brain. You're freaking out. You're terrified, and you start to see things in the room that aren't there.
Do you think this is where like astral projection and stuff comes from?
You can have out of body experiences, but usually. I haven't heard of it too much associated with sleep paralysis.
Okay.
I've experienced sleep paralysis on a number of occasions, mostly when I was in college. I don't really get it much anymore. I think it's around 40% of people in their lifetime, by the time, in their adult life, will have experienced it at least once. It comes in mild forms too. Like, it's not always as extreme.
Do you think it's because you said that you had it in college, and college was coincidentally where you didn't sleep a lot? Do you think there's a connection?
Yeah. There's a huge connection between like poor sleeping habits, or like I traveled a lot, so I would have jet lag, and so I might wake up at 5 a.m, or have if you're stressed, you get it. If you drink alcohol, you get it. I mentioned like if you sleep on your back, so like I would sleep on my back, and I get it. So like if this is demons, then it's some demons that they're forged just by sleeping on your stomach.
So I have a really horrible thing sometimes when I'm asleep. And it's happened my whole life. I don't think it's like sleep paralysis, but you know how some people can kind of like lucid dream, where they become aware that they're dreaming and kind of start to control their dreams and stuff?
Yep.
I can do that to some extent, but then sometimes when I'm having a nightmare, I'll realize that I'm dreaming and become very aware that it's a dream and try and wake up, and I can't wake up, and it really, really panics me.
Yeah, that's scary.
And I'll try like hitting myself or scratching myself to wake up. And then sometimes I'll wake up like having scratched myself or hurt myself by accident and stuff. And it's horrifying.
Do you ever try just screaming at the top of your lungs?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Like in the dreams.
Sometimes that bursts you out of the sleep.
I have issues as well where like suddenly when I realize I'm dreaming, I can't breathe. And like I really struggle like to be able to breathe. And I'm like, if I don't wake up now, I'm going to die. And it really panics me.
Have you had one where you're running away from someone? And
all the time,
and
your muscles are slow.
You're just slow. It's similar to what's the one?
I always
you dream
end up,
that your
like,
teeth are falling out.
The ground. Oh, I have those all the time.
I've never had that.
Oh,
it's meant to be symbolic in some form, to do with something about you're losing something that you really shouldn't lose. Might be a relationship or some bullshit. Apparently, anyway.
I've heard that. I think for me, it's symbolic of me losing my teeth, because that is one of my biggest fears in life.
Yeah, that'll be it.
Yeah, I've had a lot of relatives who've had to have their teeth out in their 20s. Like, both my grandparents, my auntie, both had their teeth out really young. When I was a kid, I had to have a lot of teeth out. Even now, I have a lot of fillings and kind of stressing, bless
I
her.
just realized the reason I don't have that is because it must be a British thing.
Oh!
Here's something for you. It's quite interesting. I did not realise this. Which country do you think has the best teeth in the world?
It's not England.
I imagine it's somewhere without much processed sugar in their food.
Evidently.
But I don't know where that'd be.
It's Britain.
What?
No.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, I'll give it to you to link in. Now, I didn't ask who has the whitest.
Then why is there a stereotype?
Do you mean the healthiest then? Because we don't really go for looks and making it look good. We just want them to be healthy, don't we?
Yeah, we're a little bit more like the Germans. We're about utility rather than aesthetics. So you
guys don't really do braces. You don't really straighten or.
Not really. Not if it's not needed. A lot of people do. It's like you can tell in America, it's very much a big thing. Americans have great teeth. It tends to be the case, and I think people define great teeth in that way as, are they white? Have they been whitened? Have they been straightened, etc. Whereas in the UK and most of the world, to be fair, it's just if they function and they're not causing problems, then that's fine.
I love how we start off on demons and we end up on teeth.
To be fair, I would love to get my teeth like straightened. Like I'm saving up for braces at the minute, but I want like the invisible ones that go like behind my teeth. So it's a few £1,000s. But I was offered, like, as a teenager, the dentist was like, you can have braces if you want, but because it's just cosmetic rather than like for any health reasons, like the NHS isn't going to cover it. And we were like we can afford that.
Yeah.
So my teeth have been like a constant sort of source of anxiety for me for the last 25 years.
I'm going to pull you guys back on topic. So
yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
Get through that because we have not a ton of time. But I wanted to kind of back on the topic of sleep paralysis. One thing that I noticed when I was studying it, because like for me, when I experienced it a number of times, and the first few times that I experienced it, I was very religious. And so to me, like the notion of demons and hell and stuff was very prevalent in the back of my mind. Like I was always kind of worried about hell and I was worried about demons because that's what I was instilled with as a kid. So when you're suggested these ideas, like when I would have sleep paralysis, I would wake up and like my muscles are like firm and I'd feel this like dark, scary presence. And I was like, I knew it was like beyond a shadow of a doubt, like this is a demon. It has to be a demon. It's nothing else. And even if I would like, I'd cry out and I'd just be like, I was a Christian at the time. I was baptized. I was saved. I was like a good kid. I wasn't sinning. Like I was confessing, like all this stuff. Like I'm like, there's no reason that I should be susceptible even. And I'd like be crying out, Jesus, Jesus, like save me, like in my mind. And like nothing would happen. And then I learned what it was. I discovered what it was. And I experienced it again. And this time it was different. This time it was that I was sitting there and it was that there were zombies that were outside that were coming to get me. And I just knew, and I could hear kind of an auditory like rumble of like, the zombies are coming in, the rah, like kind of the growl. Cause like I'd been watching a bunch of zombie movies and stuff. And, even after I became an atheist, I still experienced it every once in a while, but it was different. So like one time it was invaders coming to break in and rob the house. And then I look up and once the sleep paralysis passes, and it usually passes in a few seconds, and there's no other, real harm or anything from it. It's just a natural thing that can happen to anyone. But like once you wake up completely and you go and you look around the house, it's like, oh, there's nothing. There's no one there. It's entirely in my head. But you can see how something like this would cause people to think that it's demons if they're constantly told that they're surrounded by demons.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The craziest one for me was, one time, like I was lying in bed and I kind of woke up a little bit and I was, in a state of sleep paralysis and I couldn't move. And I felt like there were aliens that were coming to get me, that were coming to probe me. And, I was like sitting there and I'm like, as soon as I wake up, as soon as I can move, as soon as I can move my body, like, you're mine, I'm going to get you. Cause like I was in Texas and, I had a gun next to my bed and all of a sudden, like, I lurch up in bed and I grab my gun and I point it at the closet and I unload like an entire magazine at the closet. And all of a sudden, like, I wake up And like, it wasn't sleep paralysis. It was a dream about sleep paralysis. But I woke up into a state of sleep paralysis. So I woke up after having that dream. And I wake up and I'm in a state of sleep paralysis and the alien is still in the room with me. And at this point, I'm freaking the hell out because it's like, what the hell is going on? And all of a sudden, this figure, this alien figure, like just like is like on the ceiling. It like just comes down and it like probes me. And right as it probes me, like I jolt up in bed and like there's nothing in the room. And it was like the creepiest, most terrifying like sleep paralysis story. But it at that point I was like, okay, I know it's all in my head now, because I went and I looked at the closet and there were no bullet holes, and I looked at my gun and I still had all my ammo and my butthole felt fine. And yeah, I was okay.
That is a very good review of Inception.
But if you don't know, if you're not familiar with the science, if you don't have the internet, if you don't have Wikipedia, if you can't go to a doctor and ask them, or if you've never done the research and you experience something like this and all you're ever told is that there's demons that are out to get you and the world is a big, dangerous, scary place, then of course if you experience something like this, you're going to think that it's something supernatural. And if you have, you know, schizophrenia or epilepsy or something, or multiple personality disorder, a lot of times people have a feeling like they may have multiple personalities, multiple inside one brain. And so they may talk as though they're different people, or talk to themselves and have like different identities, or it's called dissociative identity disorder. Sometimes multiple personality disorder is kind of the I think the slang term, but I think dissociative identity disorder is the official name for it, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
But all of these things, like, our brain is not it's an organ. It fails just like our hearts, just like everything else. And if we don't realize that it's all chemical, and that it has like miswirings and malfunctions and problems and stuff, and it's chemical, and it can be altered with drugs, and it can be altered with trauma and physical, getting hit in the head and stuff, like all of this stuff can lead to some serious horrific repercussions. And if now that we know that, to say that it's still demons is pushing us back into the dark ages, but people are still making that claim, and it leads to a lot of harm.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Rachel.
Oh, thanks. I was gonna say, do you think that originally a lot of it was almost like a coping mechanism, because like these people didn't know what was happening and they wanted an explanation where, someone could fix what was going on? And for most people, like, the authority figure in their lives would have been, like, their local vicar or priest or whoever. And so, like, looking up to someone like that who was then saying, like, hey, I can fix you, I can, do an exorcism and get rid of the demons. Like, it almost seems like they were just searching for just a way to fix it when they didn't really understand it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's making me think as well. For example, if, somebody observes that someone's having an epileptic fit, but to them nobody knows what it is, and they say, quickly bring this person to my hut, I'm going to do what I can do, and they sprinkle oil, or they collect their urine, or whatever nonsense they did, and like I said, that actually was a thing. The point being is that people do recover from epileptic fits. It's very rarely fatal. I don't even know if it can in and of itself be fatal. That's just my ignorance showing, but I'm sure it can, because you could fall over and hit your head, etc. But I don't know if the act itself can be. Probably. But the thing
I think there's some evidence of like some seizures damaging part of the brains, but I'm not sure how common that is.
Yeah.
Sorry,
I mean, if it damages the part that makes you breathe, game over.
Yeah.
Well, especially though when you're going through puberty and when you're a kid, a lot of this stuff, like, it may be temporary. You know, your brain is in a very constant state of flux, and if you experience it in your teenage years, and then someone comes along and does an exorcism on you, and maybe your brain would have healed fine on its own, and and you get to your 20s and stuff, and it goes away, and you're like, oh yeah, it must have been the priest.
Well, this is it.
Like,
they would leave the hut, and they'll be okay, and it'll be like, come back again if a demon comes in again. And people will just have to say that person's susceptible to demonic presence, and that's it. But but that priest over there, that person, that druid, he is actually alleviating this issue, because he goes in the hut having a fit, and he comes out just fine. 15 minutes later, quite happy. It's like, this guy obviously knows what he's talking about. When no, it's just not the case. You can outgrow these things as well. I don't hallucinate anymore. I did when I was young. Unless I'm not actually talking to anyone right now. But yeah.
Well, and Rachel, you were talking about how it's kind of a placeholder for ignorance when people didn't know any better. But when you claim to have divine authority and to know, the voice of God, it's very difficult to resist the temptation to claim that you know about everything. So when someone's coming to you for advice, you're like, well, I'm the authority position, and it's a bit of a power trip. It makes you feel like you're special or important. There's an exorcist named Francisco Lopez Sedano in Mexico, I believe, and he claims that he's done over 6,000 exorcisms, and he's very proud of the fact that the devil fears him. And it's a power trip, though. There's over, and the sad thing is that you would think as society advances, as knowledge and information becomes more widespread, and medical advances show that this is BS and show what it really is, you'd think that this would be a dying thing. But there's actually a rise in the number of people seeking exorcisms, and right now there's a center in Rome where like they literally have an exorcism training program, and earlier this year there were more than 200 priests around the world that recently went to Rome to take this exorcism course.
I don't suppose you know where this increase is, because I'm thinking America, the US might be
it happens a lot in South America. It happens a lot in Africa. There's a lot of harm though that comes from it, and I'll give you a couple of examples, and if you guys think of any other areas where of harm that's caused by this, but in Nigeria and other parts of Africa, they have what are called witch children, where basically kids think, or parents and people in the communities think that these kids are demon possessed, and they might just be epileptic. They might have dissociative identity disorder, sleep paralysis, any of these things that we mentioned.
That actually reminds me of in the 16 and 1700s, especially in Scotland, they used to believe in changeling children. So when a baby was sickly after birth, they used to think that it had been swapped with a changeling child or an elf child. So they used to leave it overnight in the forest. And the idea was, if the baby got better, it meant that the changelings had come and claimed back their child and given the human baby back. And if the child died, it was actually the changeling child that had died. And so their kid was still out there healthy somewhere. It just wasn't with them.
For crying out loud.
In exposure.
It kind of made sense almost as a coping mechanism to think if the baby dies, at least it wasn't my baby that died, it was the changeling one. Can you imagine if they still did that today?
These witch children they're persecuted and often, very often killed, and they have to be harbored and protected and saved by people, and so that they don't face death. Literally, kids who are being killed because they think that there's demons and stuff.
That's really interesting, because
if you're albino, you have a really rough time, because either, depending on what country or what region you're
going to get sunburn.
You're seen either you're seen as evil, and they fear you, and so they kill you to get rid of the evil presence and the evil spirit and stuff that they claim is in you, or it's seen as good fortune, and so they'll harvest the body parts. They'll kill them and harvest the body parts of albino kids.
That's horrific.
Yeah. Steve, you had something you were...
I think I did. I think it's gone from my mind. We were just speaking about... No,
go on. Were you going to tell us that you're a witch child or a changeling child?
There was another case there was a woman, Vilma Trujillo. She was a Nicaraguan woman, and they tried to perform an exorcism on her, but part of the process, sometimes these exorcisms can be extremely vigorous and intense, and she was starved and burned so badly that she died during the exorcism.
Oh, bless her. That's horrible.
And yet you have people there's a priest named Gabriel Amorth that by May of 2013, after 60 years in the ministry, I think it was 60 years, it was a long time, several decades, he said that he had performed 160,000 exorcisms in the course of his ministry, which if you do the numbers and you see how many he said that he'd done the previous year and a couple years before that, you're looking at an exorcism one every minute or something. There's no way it's not possible.
It's not true. This can't be true.
But then he's like, oh, I only did some of them in person. It's what? Are you just I prayed over conceptually over, I whispered a chant, a wished upon a star that 100,000 kids would be free of demons, and now I can add that to my resume. It's bullshit of epic proportions.
Oh, god damn it.
I find it so insane that we've got all these like scientific advances, and yet you still have some people who are like, oh, I'm not going to vaccinate my kids in case it makes them autistic. And then on the other hand, people are like, oh, but I will perform an exorcism for an actual medical condition. Or I'm going to like try and heal my child from being gay. And it's like, there's just no consistent logic between any of these people.
But Rachel,
just use the real science.
The thing is, vaccines cause adults.
That is the worst plague of all.
Yes.
Dangerous way of thinking, though. And to give you just one example, there is a guy named Pierre de l'Ancre in 1609 in France, and during the witch hunts of Laborde, and if I'm not butchering the pronunciation, but all it took was one gullible guy, and he brought literally 70 people to the stake to be burned alive.
Unbelievable.
So all it takes, and you've got the Salem witch trials, you've got the Inquisition. If this is why science is so important.
This is why ignorance is the enemy.
It inoculates us against these incredibly harmful things. And the last thing that I want to close on as far as the harm is that when people seek out, when people look for religious or supernatural explanations for stuff like this, they reject medical treatment that is so desperately needed. Yeah. So there are medical treatments for epilepsy. There are things that you can take. You can see a doctor. You can figure out what's causing it, and you can get help. And it's not perfect. It's a work in progress. Yes, that is why we need more medicine and more research, not less. That is why we need to invest more money and more time in learning better medical treatments. But when you fail to go and see a doctor, like there are medicines that help now. There are things that are almost, for lack of a better word, miraculous, that medicine can do wonders, and it's tested and it's tried and it's proven against a placebo to do better than nothing, or better than a placebo or a sugar pill. And yet people reject medical treatment because they see the witch doctor, or they see the exorcist, or they see the priest.
Also,
and people suffer as a result.
Thinking that poor person that you mentioned reached out to you. It's like the very people that are meant to care for her the most, the people that are meant to love her the most, the people that are meant to understand her condition the most, have been poisoned by insane beliefs, so that they essentially think that she's problematic. That at the very least she's possessed by a demon, but at the most that she's letting that demon in. It's just horrible to see. It's just one of the reasons why I hate religion and I hate stupid thinking. It makes otherwise decent people do fucking atrocious things.
Yeah. What she needs is love.
Yeah.
She needs people to come along and be like, that's absolutely horrific. And in her case, she was very open about the fact that like there was a lot of abuse in her childhood. And it's like, yeah, if I went through a massive amount of emotional or physical abuse, and I was trying to shut out memories and stuff, there is some mental and psychological damage that can happen from that. That can lead to severe trauma. And instead, what she needs now is she needs love, she needs kindness, she needs her family to come along and support her and in a therapeutic way, in an endearing way, in a compassionate way. And instead she's being told that she has the devil himself living inside of her and demons, and it's horrific and it's horrible. And I'm so sorry that anyone has to go through that type of stuff.
It's a similar thing to the times people who try and say that people who have cancer and stuff, like it's God's will and they did something to deserve it. No, don't tell people horrible stuff like that.
This is why I have a big problem with Buddhism. A lot of people look at Buddhism and whatnot and Hinduism, and they think there's not so many issues. It's like you have millions of people. They see a child that's suffering with like cancer, and because of their religion, they think that they must deserve it because it's some kind of manifestation or punishment for what they did in their previous life. So rather than caring for them, they act in that way. It's abysmal.
Yeah. Well, I need to wrap up the show, but thank you guys so much for joining and for exploring the world of demons.
I think as a final note, it's probably important to tell people or warn people not to get possessed by demons this Halloween. We all know it's a completely horrible, evil holiday that should not be celebrated.
I am the most terrifying thing in the dark. I am the storm.
And it could be the case that
the darkness
we three are possessed, and we are leading you astray.
Yeah. No, I'm just hired by the Illuminati to, you know.
Well, I'm possessed by reason.
Yeah, possessed by reason. I love it. All right, we will see you guys in 2 weeks. I guess we do every other week now. When I think Rachel or Steve.
Me.
Steve will be talking about something.
Something indeed.
Yeah. Take care, guys.
We don't have a tagline.
This has been an absolute blast, and now we want you to join in the conversation over on the Here and How Facebook and Twitter pages, or follow us on Pinterest and Instagram if you just want some of the dankest of sciencey memes. If you like one of our particular styles, check out each of our YouTube channels: Rachel Oates, Rationality Rules by Stephen Woodford, and Holy Kool-Aid by me, Thomas Westbrook. To find all of our episodes, show notes, contact information, and more, warp on over to our home base, thehereandhow.com. If you enjoyed this episode and want us to succeed in spreading the love of science, you can help us out by giving us a 5-star review on iTunes or Stitcher. And to all our friends and family listening, thank you for spending this episode with us. We'll be back to explore another exciting big idea next week. Now go create something magnificent.